The next thing to do is to consider the actual anatomy of the brainstem in more detail. So we'll start off by considering each of the components separately. The first thing that we need to have a look at is the midbrain, and we need to examine its structure. The first thing of the structure that we need to examine is its external features. In terms of its external features, we should look at the ventral surface, then the dorsal surface, and then finally the attached cranial nerves. And this is the template that we'll be using for all the parts of the brainstem. So with the ventral surface, the main features to note are the cerebral peduncles, and in between them we've got an interpeduncular fossa. The dorsal surface has the superior cerebellar peduncle, which connects to the back of it, and above this we have the superior and inferior colliculi. There's two cranial nerves which attach to the midbrain. These are firstly cranial nerve 4, which attaches to the posterior surface of the midbrain below the inferior colliculus and winds around the lateral surface of the midbrain to emerge lateral to the oculomotor nerve. Now, the oculomotor nerve emerges from within the interpeduncular fossa and passes forwards and laterally. So that's it there. The next thing to consider is the midbrain's internal features. So some of the labels are already on, which mucks things up a little, never mind. But the first thing that we need to do is consider the general parts of internal feet, the general structure of the brainstem, and this will help us identify structures within the midbrain. So we've got two sections here. The top one is at the level of the inferior colliculus, and the bottom one is at the level of the superior colliculus. The first thing that we need to do is consider the tectum. We need to consider the cerebral aqueduct, which represents the ventricular system within the midbrain. The next thing that we will cover is the tectum. Now, the tectum is a part of the midbrain which lies behind the cerebral aqueduct. It consists of the superior and inferior colliculus. The next part of the midbrain to consider is the tegmentum. Now, the tegmentum has firstly nuclei and then tracts. The main tracts within the tegmentum are ascending tracts or interconnecting tracts. So, firstly we'll consider the nuclei. The nuclei can be considered as cranial nerve nuclei and other special nuclei or named nuclei. And finally the reticular formation, which fills in the gaps between all the nuclei. At the level of the inferior colliculus, we've got the trochlear nerve nucleus in front of the cerebral aqueduct. At the level of the superior colliculus, we've got the oculomotor nucleus in the midline with the parasympathetic component lying either side of the midline just in front of the cerebral aqueduct. In addition, we also have the red nucleus, which hasn't completely been formed here, which lies within the anterior part of the tegmentum. The next thing to consider is the tracts. The ascending tracts to consider are the medial lemniscus, which lies in the anterior part of the anterolateral part of the tegmentum, and immediately behind the medial lemniscus at this point is the spinothalamic tract. The final tract is the interconnecting tracts, and the interconnecting tracts to be considered are the medial longitudinal fasciculus, and these lie either side of the midbrain in the dorsal part of the tegmentum. And the role of the medial longitudinal fasciculus is to connect the cranial nerves, the oculomotor and trochlear nerves, to the abducens nerves, and also to the vestibular nerves. This allows coordinated eye movements, first of all, and the second thing is you can have reflex eye movements to changes in position of the head, which is really important for maintaining steady gaze. The next thing to consider is the ventral part of the midbrain, and the ventral part of the midbrain is formed by the cerebral peduncles superiorly, and these cerebral peduncles converge lower down, as you can see here. The ventral part is separated from the tegmentum by the substantia nigra, which is a collection of tissue. so a collection of dopaminergic neurons behind the cerebral peduncles in this location here. The final thing to consider is the specific functional anatomy of each of these components. So we'll start by going from back to front. The superior colliculus is concerned with general light reflexes. That means movements of the head and neck in response to light. Not labelled here, the pretectal nuclei is a nucleus above the superior colliculus, and this nucleus is responsible for pupillary light reflexes. The inferior colliculus is the next nucleus, and this collection of cells is responsible for mediating general auditory reflexes. In front of this we've got the cranial nerve nuclei, whose function has already been considered, and then we've got the red nucleus. The red nucleus is responsible for the rubrospinal tract, which is an important extrapyramidal control. The next thing to consider is the tracts. The spinothalamic tract mediates pain and temperature sensation for the opposite side of the body, and the medial lemniscus mediates tactile, kinesthetic and proprioceptive information also from the opposite side of the body. Finally, we have the medial longitudinal fasciculus, which we've already talked about, and then the cerebral peduncles, which carry information regarding voluntary motor activity for the opposite side of the body. So the motor control, this cerebral peduncle contains information for control of the upper and lower limbs on the left-hand side. And that's it for the midbrain.